Altenborn edits the news.
Good evening, everybody. The mystery with reference to what has happened to the city of Flint and why seems to deepen. Today, the Chicago Daily News reports in a special dispatch from Berlin that the reason why the German prize crew did not take the city of Flint into Germany and did take her to Tromsø, Norway, is because the ship's navigation charts were inadequate for the journey to Germany. Consequently, a German prize crew, which is supposed to know a good deal about German ports and not so much about ports in the extreme northern part of Norway or of Soviet Russia, succeeds in navigating into the rather difficult port of Tromsø and into the no less difficult port of Murmansk without any difficulty and presumably without adequate navigation charts, but couldn't have taken the ship into a German port. And one just wonders whether perhaps the difficulty of the navigation to German ports might not have been increased by the factor of the British blockade. From Moscow, it's announced tonight that the German prize crew aboard the United States steamer City of Flint has been released. But there was no news as to what has happened to the 41 members of the American crew. Now, there's something very curious about this whole episode. If Russia is neutral, a prize crew bringing a ship into a neutral Russian port is supposed to be interned. If Russia is a belligerent on the side of Germany and releases the crew for that reason, she has not said so. Here is the official Russian government statement. According to a report from Murmansk, the internment of the German crew of the city of Flint has been cancelled by marine authorities at Murmansk since it has been ascertained that the steamer was brought into the port for repairs to her machines. For the time being, the steamer remains at Murmansk for precise verification as to the composition of her cargo. Now, those are two strange statements, because if the city of Flint's machines were good enough to carry her across the Atlantic and up the coast of Norway and down the White Sea and into Murmansk, they should be good enough to run her out. Minor repairs could be made in a day or two. If major repairs were involved, then both the ship and the crew should be interned under the provisions of international law. Secondly, one wonders what business it is of Soviet Russia, a neutral power, to verify the composition of the cargo of an American ship that is claimed as a German prize. That's the business of a German prize court. Soviet Russia isn't supposed to know what German prize law is, or the exact details of the German contraband list and how it is to be applied. And yet here, suddenly, the marine authorities at Murmansk arrogate to themselves the duty of investigating the cargo and deciding upon its composition as to what it is. Now, the American crew is probably on board the ship. But, unfortunately, Murmansk is in a frontier zone from which foreigners are excluded. Foreigners are excluded and always have been from a lot of zones in Soviet Russia. It's a very difficult thing to get any kind of a pass or permission to travel over more than a very restricted area in Soviet Russia. And that has been true ever since the Soviet regime has been in power. It's possible, of course, that some American embassy official has obtained permission to proceed to Murmansk in order to find out exactly what is happening to the ship and to the crew. Certainly, as I've said, the whole procedure seems very strange and is certainly out of line with the commonly accepted precepts of international law. United States shippers continue to complain of very unfair restrictions by the British Navy against American ships plying on their usual routes. Minister of Economic Warfare, Cross, said today in England that 338,000 tons of goods for Germany have already been intercepted by Britain. Well, from the British point of view, that's fine. From the American point of view, it isn't quite so fine, because our shippers are grumbling at the delays in British-controlled ports. They make their complaints to the American authorities, and they have brought them to the attention of our State Department. These delays amount to 18 days in some instances. And naturally, that tremendously increases the transport costs of the American shippers. It causes restlessness among the crews. It makes for heavy insurance charges. It causes the deterioration of the cargoes. And, of course, it's a tremendous expense to keep those ships idle in British ports for so long a period. Since the outbreak of the war, 24 ships flying the United States flag have been detained by the British Contraband Control. Now, this is all a repetition of World War history. At that time, we sent notes about it. But Ambassador Page told the British to pay no attention to our notes, and of course they didn't. The Belgians were told the other day that they should consider such inconveniences with respect to their shipping as the least that they could contribute to the great cause of democracy. Well, there's a hint tonight that we are going to recognize the blockade and send the manifests of American cargoes in advance. That can be done now by Clipper, so that the British will have those manifests indicating the composition of the cargo before the ships arrive in front of the British blockade, and presumably that would speed up the process of examination. But our government confronts a real problem. To what extent are we going to permit either of the belligerents, any of the belligerents in this war, to interfere with our neutral rights? Now, no one suggests that we want to get into any serious trouble with reference to it, but there are many things that we could do. Naturally, all belligerents are eager to maintain the good opinion of the United States. Certainly, Herr von Ribbentrop indicated that very definitely yesterday when he devoted so large a part of his eloquent discourse to announcing how eager Germany is to maintain good relations with the United States. And certainly our British friends would also like to maintain good relations. Well, there's an opportunity for them to do something very practical that will help along those good relations. Secretary of the Treasury, Henry A. Morgenthau, assured United States Senator Vandenberg today that the administration does not intend to use the $2 billion stabilization fund or any other Treasury money to aid any belligerent. That's an important assurance because the operations of the stabilization fund are practically secret. The administration is not obliged to report on those operations as they are going on, and consequently there's a great deal of discretion in the hands of the Secretary of the Treasury as to what he does with that tremendous sum of money. And the assurance given today definitely indicates that this fund is not to be used in any way to favor one belligerent or the other. In the United States Senate today, Senator La Follette failed in an effort to limit arms shipments. He wanted them put on a quota basis, allowing average yearly shipments. That amendment was beaten 66 to 21. That's about the majority by which most of the isolationist amendments are being beaten. The Senate refused also, by a similar vote, to limit the president's power to put the neutrality law into effect. Obviously, as the neutrality law stands, the president has a great deal of power to declare when our interests are involved, when a state of war exists, and it's difficult to see how that could be handled in any other way. Obviously, in matters of that kind, the administration must have a great deal of discretion, and so the Senate decided by its vote today. The Nazi press asserts today that the moment has come for aerial action against the British Isles, and that was intimated also in what Foreign Minister Ribbentrop said yesterday with reference to Britain's challenge of a war to a finish. Hitler today held a war council, and it is expected that the Germans decided upon certain military measures. It is true that the Germans have so far kept most of the initiative in this war. Now, Captain Anthony Eden, in a speech that he made in Britain today, says that Hitler has lost the initiative. Well, from the standpoint of a neutral observer, one must admit that most of the important actions have been initiated by Germany rather than by Britain or by France. We must expect the air drive to come soon. The British showed today that they could fly over Berlin, Hamburg, Magdeburg without losing a single plane. Our bombers can easily go to 20,000 feet and then glide in over a distance of 50, 60, perhaps 80 miles. then make a power dive and drop tons of projectiles. They could send up to 300 in a single flight. They'd lose perhaps 50. They'd do enormous damage. They would kill perhaps thousands of people. But one wonders to what extent it would contribute to war victory. On the basis of experience in Spain, air raids, even though they destroy cities, even though they kill thousands of the civilian population, tend to reaffirm the will to resist rather than to play any decisive part in bringing about the victory. Herbert Hoover, our only living ex-president, reaches 3 important conclusions in his most recent expression on the war. He presents them in today's issue of the Saturday Evening Post. Here they are. 1. America must keep out of these wars. 2. We can keep out of these wars. 3. We have nothing to fear for our own independence as the result of these wars. Now, on the first point, he holds that power politics has long been the curse of Europe, and that our greatest service to the world will be to maintain a strong, free America, to aid the rebuilding of a European world which will be tottering no matter who wins. He sees rival nationalisms and imperialisms as the dominating war motives and points out that they do not concern us. He warns America against building up a war economy which will collapse overnight, but this must be done by the voluntary self-restraint of businessmen. The ideals of America, he says, are not fitted to solve the problems of the highly imperialistic democracies of Europe. And the voice of experience says we can make war in Europe, but we cannot make enduring peace. He indicates that this is a time in which to stop, to look, to listen, and to learn. Good night.